My name is JD Laske, and I'm on staff here at Calvary Community Church with high school ministry. And I've been on staff for almost, it'll be 12 years this year. And then prior to that, I volunteered with high school ministry. I did a variety of different things prior to working at Calvary in career, and have been grateful to be here since 2009 on staff with HSM, and grew up in the Caneo Valley, and just grateful to be here right now.
My name is Paolina, and I'm on staff here at Calvary part-time with their Special Abilities Ministry as the integration coordinator, which I love. And I work full-time as a behavior therapist. So I work with kiddos primarily on the spectrum, and working on independent skills and social skills as well. So love it. I've been a part of Calvary on staff for almost 3 years now, and just love being able to serve the families and I think just do life with them. So we're getting married in June.
Indeed.
And we've been together almost 2 years. Oh. 2 years in September, so.
We're very excited to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to our living room.
That's right.
It's pretty neat.
It's really cozy.
We're between two ferns. Actually, one palm tree. But anywho.
They're very real.
I digress. Mm-hmm. I grew up here at Calvary, actually, and started attending here. I was probably about 6 years old, and Calvary's been a huge part of my life. And I think really where God has shown me so much grace and continuity in terms of his faithfulness has been one leading to this point we're at now, being engaged and getting ready to be married in June, has been through a really tough season. And I think a season a lot of you might reflect or relate to rather, in that being my parents were divorced when I was 9, and not really knowing how to deal with that or work through that. The people God brought in my life at that point, specifically one accepting Christ when I was in 3rd grade here at Calvary, and then moving on into middle school and high school and college ministry here at Calvary, much like you guys are watching right now. I was in your seat when I was 20 years old and asked to volunteer for an event for middle school, and really got me into, I think, a heart to serve in middle school, but more importantly, kind of going back a little bit, I think just seeing the people that God put specifically in my life in that time when I didn't really know how to respond to my parents' divorce. I was an only child. Actually, I still am an only child. But I had people like Dan Smith and others he was my high school pastor, and other people who really kind of helped shape, I think, me in a lot of ways, but in my faith journey and being in a place where they were able to relate. And I think a lot of people you meet in ministry, you'll experience, they're here not because it's a job, but because it's a calling God's led them to through their experiences. And so look around you and the people that you might interact with or just see each week at YA or at Calvary, maybe serving in ministry here at Calvary. Ask them their story. It's so powerful to know how God has brought people through a lot of really similar circumstances. And specifically, I think in relationship for each of us, we have kind of a similar story, and Paolina will share her part of it. But for me, specifically with my parents, it was a really, really challenging time. I didn't know how to. When you're 9 years old, you don't really know how to articulate those things or what you're feeling or all these other kinds of emotions. And that was my example of what a marriage looked like. And it was dissolving before me, and I didn't really know how to respond to it. But again, through God's grace, I think seeing healthy marriages around me in ministry and people in my life here at Calvary really helped me to not just cope, but to thrive in that, and to see not just what's good, but what's best. And Paolina has been the best. And that's why, for me, it's been exciting to see in a time, too, where working in ministry, there's always somebody who's saying, oh, you got to meet my granddaughter. You got to meet my niece. You know, you're single. I'm 44 years old now, about to embark on the most exciting journey of my life, to be married. And I'm just grateful for all of it. So
how do you follow that? Wow. Well, I grew up here in the area in Westlake, and I started coming to Calvary in middle school by way of one of my closest girlfriends who invited me to Hume Lake Camp, and that changed my life. I mean, I don't think I knew at that point what that would do in my faith journey, but I grew up in a house where faith was very much something that we kind of were a part of a church, but it wasn't really like living our life in that way. It was very much just kind of going through the motions of going to church on holidays, but it wasn't community and discipleship and fellowship. It wasn't that way. So I didn't have, I think even with relationship, I didn't have examples of a Christ-like relationship when it came to dating. So I continued going to Calvary through high school and loved it, but I was kind of in one foot, in kind of out the other, just very, very much there for the social aspect. It wasn't so much living out my faith. So throughout high school and college, I was kind of in and out of church and kind of trying to find my faith. And in college, my parents split, and that was like totally rocked my world. It was kind of out of nowhere for my brother and I, and that kind of rocked us. And interestingly enough, it kind of brought me away from my faith, but then in that same year kind of brought me back of just having a lot of questions and mostly anger, and I think a lot of abandonment of, a family that we were very tight-knit and very close growing up. And so to have kind of all that and what I knew taken away was really hard. And I didn't have, we had some similar experiences with our parents, but definitely traumatic as an adult going through that and not having something where my parents were arguing or we kind of saw it coming. It really kind of changed, I think, when my brother and I were out of the house and we didn't have, my parents didn't really have that dynamic of a family unit. It was just the two of them, and I kind of think they had drifted apart along the way. But I think just in faith too, now in this season is looking at strong examples of people that are walking with the Lord, but also living out their life together in their faith. It's not something they're doing separately. It's something that they're doing as a team. And I think for our relationship, that's something that we're very excited for, is just that team aspect, but also encouraging each other in their faith and knowing that this isn't something you're supposed to do by yourself. And I think for me as an adult now, getting married and all those things, I think it gave me an appreciation for a marriage in a way that I just know it's different in our experience of going through divorce. I think you hold marriage up in a different regard. I think you, in a way, don't want to have that outcome. You value marriage, but you also think, there's a lot of trauma there and hope that you don't want to be that same, have that same result. And also for our future kids and family of, putting your kids through that. I think having God at the center too is the priority, and figuring out, as long as you have that, you shouldn't fail, but also the communication aspect. I think for me, it put going through that as a young adult, I wish I would have poured into community more. And I think with young adults too, I wish I had had that in my life. I think my processing would have been different. And I think just being able to be open about that instead of, 5 years later, actually like going to a therapist and talking to someone about that. And I'm thankful for the way things played out, because it brought me back to Calvary in 2016 and started going to young adults because of a friend, Jacob Wood. And that kind of in that season, just saying yes to different opportunities to serve. And that got me plugged in at high school. And that's how I met JD and just kind of got to see him and serve with him. And I think be a part of a community that knew that despite your background, despite your experiences in relationship, and whether healthy or not healthy, that you are capable of having something strong. And I think young adults it's a huge part of my testimony as far as accountability, but people in relationship to be able to lift you up and encourage you despite your background. So,
wow, well said.
Thanks.
How do you follow that? I can't.
I think as a woman in church, like there was pressure when I came back to church of dating. And I think especially at young adults of like, there's a lot of single guys there and sweet people. But my encouragement to high school students now is good things are worth waiting for. And I think God's timing is the most powerful thing in every aspect, but I think especially in relationship, because it's really easy to see your friends that are in, dating relationships and then, engagement and then marriage and then feeling like, when is my time? And instead of that comparison of thinking our relationship, that's my biggest encouragement to people is something is good is really worth that, just waiting for God's timing. And it will feel so right and blessed when that happens, because it's not something that you're feeling like, I want this, therefore I should have it, or I need this type thing. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, that was great. Great insight. I think a lot of what had stunted my desire to be in a long-term relationship in dating through college and beyond was the idea of is it going to end up like my parents? And I think for me, it was just a genuine fear of I don't want to go through that or put anyone else through that experience. And I think that's something that even in our own experiences has helped us to understand each other in that way, which is kind of this beautiful thing God does with the brokenness of our parents. And as hard as that season was and still is in some ways for each of us, the thought of going through that for myself was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through that. I don't want to start a family and put our kids through something like that. Just always the what if was always there. And I think always kind of nagging, and that fear was palpable, but still desiring to be with someone in a relationship and eventually marriage. But it was so hard to be in that place and feel confident. And I think that was a lot of my problem, my own insecurity, my own fear. But again, the thing that resonates the most is the things you've experienced. And to that point, not really having people in my immediate circle who I could point to as a good example of a healthy marriage was really tough. So you're trying to kind of imagine what it could be like, and then always longing to be. And if you're watching this and have gone through divorce with your parents have gone through divorce, you long to be with your friends whose families seem normal to you and have a healthy family, spending time with their families and wanting to be in that environment, just because you almost want to graft yourself into what seems normal. And in the same way, being in a relationship, I think that was something I really struggled with, was being confident in having that and fostering a healthy relationship that would end in something that would be beautiful. And still, I think all the while thinking like, I know God can create something so beautiful, but then still having these insecurities of like, that would hold me back. And the thought of like, what if, and the what if could easily overshadow what God's actually doing sometimes. And so I think with Paolina specifically in our conversations from the beginning, when we met, first time I think was speaking at YA, and I was speaking on divorce and God's faithfulness through that season of my life. And I said, if anyone wants to meet for coffee at Ragamuffin, which is my office, in case you're wondering, it's where I work part-time. But that's where we met and talked about each of our experiences and stories. And I think really helped me to, unlock a lot of that insecurity that I had, or insecurities of what it could be like to be in a really healthy relationship, even having gone through those experiences with my parents. So it was huge. It really was. And so that's even why we're here right now, I think, is having that, God saying, in my story saying, be willing to share the hard stuff, because God's still good. He's still faithful. And that's the thing that's been, I think, resounding in each of our stories. And as we become one, it's no longer the fear of like, oh, what if this happens? Like, no, if God's in it, like, it's going to be awesome. So.
Yeah. It's also an encouragement to go to YA. But truly, I mean, like meeting someone, I think, where you have similar values, but how you spend your time, whether that's, serving in YA or attending. But I think that for me, as far as like, what drew me to him was that we had a lot of similarities, both in life experience, but also the ways that we spent our time. And I think the way that he continues to pour into people, whether it's students or leaders or just peers and people, that to me, meeting someone at YA I wasn't seeking that, but I think it was kind of like a no-brainer when we continued to meet, of just, wanting to be doing things side by side with someone. And if that's the same ministry, great. But just being a part of the church body, I think, is like now having that healthy relationship. I realize why all of the other ones did not work, because that was, we were not walking with the Lord at that time. But I think just knowing that you want to have someone that you're not apologizing because you're doing something else at church, or you're going on another mission trip, or whatever that may be, but having someone that also wants to serve people and love people is, I think, the need. And I think if that's not what you're looking for, to be able to talk to other couples of what do you guys do together that, brings you closer in your faith and continues to, I think, serve others. So
definitely huge encouragement. And that is, I think there's a laundry list in dating where you go, I want to have these 25 things. And you don't narrow it down because you care less, but you narrow it down to things that matter most. And I know for me, Paolina loves Jesus, and she loves people, and she loves serving and volunteering and all these things that I think for me too really resonated with my spirit, and how God's wired me and wired her. So it's not this like she'd said, just this thing that to be able to be in a relationship where to understand, like, I'm praying about this mission trip. I'm praying about this conversation. I'm praying about these things, and how prayer and just God's faithfulness again continues to be, and just to even have the understanding of, you just know when it's praying for a student or a family or a situation, the empathy that God, I think, creates between the two of us too for me, it's increased too, because I see how she'll pour out on a Saturday and volunteer her time just to help a family who's in need. And those are the things that's a beautiful thing. Like, that's amazing to me to witness. So, and spurs me on too. I mean, to find someone who cares deeply about the Lord, but also wants to increase I think my capacity to love people well and to love one another has only gotten greater through this whole experience. So
that's really nice.
I'll try. And we've talked about this, but for me, it was really challenging. I think when Paolina is so intentional, and how she will ask questions and care deeply for somebody. And I've seen her do this time and time again. If you know her, or have gotten a chance to talk with her, she'll ask you questions, obviously to get to know you, but in a deeper sense to really understand like how you're wired and how she can best interact with you. And for myself, if I've met with you for coffee, it's like, that's typically my role. And so it was really awkward for me. It was like, nobody ever sits and asks questions to me or asks me about my family. And so I felt uncomfortable at first. I was like, okay, like how do I respond to this? How do I, have somebody who is able to ask questions, kind of in the same tier, if you will, and repeatedly. And so I think just meeting for coffee over time was like gaining confidence of like, no, she just cares deeply about like where I'm at and who I am. And those things really mattered. I think it was such an affirmation, to the point too that, further along in our relationship, it was actually following the borderline shooting, and this is a huge part of our story, I think, in as much as after that event, and we were offered counseling at Calvary. I was hesitant, and Paolina said, "Why don't you just go? They're offering that counseling to go to have some sense of peace and trying to kind of work through that, as everyone in the community was at that point and still is in some ways." And I remember thinking like, I don't want to go, like I'm fine, which if you've ever said I'm fine, I don't need any help, is usually the indication you need to go talk to somebody about something. And I can't encourage that enough to just in any capacity, whether it's personal or relationships or whatever, family, whatever it might be. There's some great people here on staff who care deeply and want to just hear your story. And that was what was such a thing that really unlocked, I think, a lot for me in our relationship, was just the sense of like, she wanted me to do better and to be better and to be in a place where there was healing for me in that season. And it led to a whole lot more understanding of, I think, just the depth of our relationship, but how much she cared so intentionally and so deeply for me. And that was something I had not experienced in other relationships in the past. And so that, I think, for me, really set a whole new trajectory, I think, in our relationship at that point. And then beyond that, serving together, we got to serve on a YA team in summer of 2018. It was actually before that. And then into 2019, we began dating after summer. September 16th of 2019 was our first official date.
Yeah. Facebook
official. It's on my MySpace too.
Oh, yeah. Don't do that. No, I think going back with like what you were talking about with counseling, I think those of you that know JD too have like gotten coffee with him, and he's always the one to pour into others. So it was neat to see that transformation too, of being able to go and talk to some, obviously professional, but I think that shocked me that it was uncomfortable for him to have questions asked to him. And it wasn't, I mean, I wanted to get to know him more, and that's why we started getting coffee. And then it kind of just turned into where I found myself like, I have so many questions, and I just felt like a connection. I didn't know whether it was like an attraction, but I just knew that I really liked being around him. And I remember talking with girlfriends early on of like, I have feelings, and is this okay? And asking for guidance with that. And my previous roommates, Sarah, still my current roommate, but my other one, Kendra, just getting prayer over that, of like making sure that my focus was strong, and the areas that I was serving, I didn't want to be distracted. I didn't want to feel like I was doing those things because I wanted to be around him. And I think just even seeking guidance from Brian Howard, who is one of JD's best friends, like just wanting to make sure within the church, like that this was respectful as I was starting to kind of develop feelings. And I think also for women, it's okay to pursue a guy respectfully. And that's a lot of our story was like, I affirmed him. And if anything else, like I wanted it to just be an affirmation, and wherever this ends up going, I just wanted him to know that that's how I felt. And our story was drawn out, but I think in the best way too, of, you getting to talk with someone and kind of being able to process through things at a young age that were still kind of coming into play at that point. And I think just by continuing to meet with each other without an agenda was really helpful, and just getting to know each other. And previously, like I was saying, just not letting outside pressures play in, because it was very easy where people were asking like, how many times have you been to coffee? And like, are you dating yet? And that was distracting. But I remember at a point when we didn't hang out for a while, and I just remember thinking like, wherever this goes, like, I just hope that my affirmation toward him is going to help, like, in his next relationship, of just knowing like people see you and like you are a wonderful person. And I think knowing that he had been single for a season, like I felt like it was my like job to be able to affirm him in that way without having an expectation of, if just because you like someone, it doesn't mean that they have to have those feelings in that same moment too. And I think just being able to be prayerful of that right person to come in when God sees it to happen, not just because you think you're ready. And I think a lot of our story too is just because I thought I was ready for that, I wasn't. And why it's been so much sweeter now is that I think we've had time to really grow in our faith and be sure in who God's called us to be, instead of feeling like, okay, I think I'm ready and I probably should be because everyone else is telling me I am, that's helpful of just, and again, I think godly couples that are encouraging and making you lift each other up, instead of feeling like, well, I'm just going to make that person how I want them to be because I'm ready for that. But Ragamuffin, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Ragamuffin.
Yeah.
And more than great coffee.
Yeah, all the young adults and students that saw us at coffee were like, hey, I'm like, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. But no, I think just having people, even in this season now of engagement, people that have really encouraged us and been praying for us in the season of friendship, then to dating, and now engaged to be married, that to me is, I think, one of the biggest gifts in this is that we're not doing this alone. And we have people that are wanting to continue to be in our lives and encourage us and pray for us. And I think that's just something that it's made such a difference in our relationship, because we feel we want to be an example to other people in relationship, but also not this cookie cutter type relationship of like, there's really hard things we've both been through. And I think being able to bring that into a relationship is the example that I don't think we take lightly, of wanting to be encouraging to people. So.
Yeah. One of the things, so many of the conversations we've had with students in high school specifically, and some in YA now too, are predicated on that same premise of divorce or struggle in relationships. And even the idea of marriage in our culture now, and how things are being redefined in some places in our world and our country. And I think being able to see this beautiful thing that God's created, that we get to experience and celebrate, and be an example to others of that there's hope through it, and to come from a place of how's this going to work, going through high school and college and really challenging times and seasons of uncertainty or insecurity or anxiety or whatever it might be, to be in a place where there's not just satisfaction, but there's hope and there's joy and there's the fruit that comes from that, and healing that comes from that too. It's been really powerful to experience, because I think that's something we share, and it's not this like, well, this is the chapter in my book and the chapter in your book. It's like combining those two stories together in this really beautiful way that God sews together. And it's like, I love the example I think Pastor Sean used several years ago. Shout out to Pastor Sean. But one of the backside of the tapestry, and just seeing how messy life can be, and these little knots and little things that are like these loose threads that are like under the rug, and you turn it over to this beautiful tapestry that God creates. And I think in this way, it's brought two of us together to create and start to build this tapestry together that's so beautiful, that we get to see the byproduct of something that's broken, it's ashes, that God creates this beautiful thing in and from. And again, I believe in just my own experience too, just seeing that in other people is what we get to do. And God's using us for that. It's not us doing this thing, it's God doing it through us, which is such a powerful thing to realize too. It's like, just to be able to be, hopefully an example of like, this is how we work through things together and how we have conversations about these topics together and go through those hard things together, but still come out stronger because of it. Like a refiner's fire. It's the same idea or principle, I think, in this relationship where we get to experience that. And I think for students to see, it's like, you don't have to be down if you're single right now, or you feel like you have to get married right now, or you have to, like, these things that are external timelines sometimes are so overwhelming. And I see students who so oftentimes I feel like it's like junior year, senior year especially, it's like, well, all my friends are in a relationship, I need to be in a relationship. It's just because society or even your friends in your small group tell you indirectly you need to be in this relationship. It's like God's timing is perfect, and that's what's so powerful to realize too. And so there's always hope in that. So to stay focused in the season leading up to this point now, and really it's been all my adult life really in various relationships and to this point. Again, I think we're always looking to examples, and I think that's one thing that's so important too, to find those examples in your life and really see them as obviously human, and they're imperfect like we are, but also saying like, look at what they've done to maintain the relationship or build the relationship or strengthen their marriage and things like that. And so I think for me, it's been to see the examples that God's put in my life and to be aware of it, and to not just long for it, but to pray for that and go like, that's what I want, an example of what I want. And there's many couples I could list who've done that, and I think have been an example of that. And especially once they've gone through tough times as well in their relationship, and don't have enough time to share all those stories. But I think, again, the people that God's put in my life, to not just be so focused on the moment or, the things I don't have, and again, the people that God has put in my life, and to celebrate that in a way that I'm able to see their examples of what it means. We're going through premarital counseling now with Jen and Dan Smith, and just been this awesome season of not just the connection of him having been my high school pastor over 25 years ago now, but just the longevity and health of their relationship. And so again, you can dwell on the things that aren't great very easily. We can easily ruminate on the things that are challenging, that can be discouraging or negative, and kind of like people, we kind of tend to be that way. We can become very cynical, very focused on the pain and the brokenness, but still not realizing that all around us, God's put these awesome examples. And so we're praying for these things, for God to Lord, give me a sign, help me to understand, or give me clarity. And it's all around us. It's just a case of being aware of it and going, oh, I get it. Okay, Holy Spirit, help me to see the people in my life who've done it well and have done it right. Not perfect, because I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. We're all learning together. And so there's generations involved. And I really believe that there's people who've come before. And I love the quote that we're living in a season of answered prayer, which is a constant. And so there's people who've been praying for you before you were born, your parents, maybe your grandparents, and generations before. And you're living in the fruit of their answered prayer that God's blessed you with, where you're able to sit right now and watch these stories and hear these stories. But ask people around you and be willing to ask them questions, or sit down with them, grab a cup of coffee with one of us, and we're happy to meet with you too. But just knowing that there's people all around you that I think, the same way for me, like I saw people in my life, and you just observe as you get older that there's people who do it well and who follow the Lord, and you live to kind of follow that example, not to replicate their story, but to follow after what they've done and ask them how they've done it. And for me, it's been the people say, I just stay focused on how I think I'm aware of what God's doing, and being humble before my wife and my community, and being involved and being connected, I think is so important too. And so I think really investing deeply and investing well in where God has you planted. And maybe it's the season that you're in right now at Calvary, where you say, hey, I know I'm going to be here for a few more years. I'm going to college locally, or I'm out of college, and just being connected into a small group and community is so crucial too, to have people in your life go, what about this? Like, let's be praying for that and just being, trusting God in that process too. That's what really, I think, helped me too in that season of just uncertainty, where there are always people encouraging me along that path throughout my life, almost like going along. I love the visual. My dad had this really cool story. It's like, relationships often in life, it's like two people passing like on two different barges on a river. And sometimes you spend more time with more people. That's certain people you'll spend maybe years with or a lifetime with, you are lifetime friends, and people you'll just pass in a season of your life. But there's always something to be learned from that too, and to be encouraged by that. So, yeah.
I think when there wasn't like closure in knowing like what our story was going to be, or like if it was going to continue, I think, like he was saying, community, but I think just having like a close-knit group of people that you can confide in, that are going to hold you accountable, so you're not distracted and you're not feeling like I need to have all these things in line or else I don't have it together. But I think that honesty too, of being focused as to where God's called you to, and listening to that call instead of feeling like, well, I'm only going to do these things because I feel like something good's going to happen by doing those things. Just doing those things and saying yes, I think helped me not only just be able to serve, but not feeling like I deserve those things. Like I just wanted to continue to do the things that I felt I really enjoyed doing, but I liked being around people that had that like-minded feeling of serving people. And I had a lot of moments where I felt not really angry with God. There was confusion. I do remember that, of feeling like, well, why am I at this church then if I'm like, I don't want to be distracted, but I feel like there's certain things that are just unfinished. And I remember, I think for me, there were certain times going to high school ministry and like not going to say hello to him, because I just felt like I want to be here. I want to pour into students. I want to be able to not be distracted. And I think that was something too, that I just needed to be obedient in going on certain mission trips or doing things that felt uncomfortable, because I needed to have my faith tested in those ways of, again, just because you feel like you want something, that you deserve it, and that's your timing because your friends are in whatever season. I think that was, and I think being reminded too of the relationships, I was seeing the relationships that I was getting in coming back to this area, and the fruit of God pursuing me through people that I had walked away from my faith, and conversations of people that I felt like, wow, I had so pushed my faith into far away for a long time. I just felt like I could do things on my own. And I think being reminded of the things that like I was wrestling with, and then God provided, but then coming back to my faith and feeling like, wow, okay, I know God's with me. I just need to continue to do those things. And I know he's going to provide. It's probably just going to look really different than what I thought. So, I think even like you're saying though too, just having answered prayers now of knowing whatever area of your life that you're feeling like you're still holding on to, like God has all of it, but you have to just like let that, give it to him. Otherwise it's not going to be the way it should be. And everything has been so much sweeter because we know that obviously there's areas that are still hard, but I think you just feel that provision, by being able to be obedient. So
it was actually after counseling in January of 2019, and we were sitting and we were talking about the relational things. And I remember Paolina saying, yeah, but it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be like the same thing. I think we're talking about like family and our family story. And I think that was the moment I realized it wasn't just someone who cared in the moment. It was someone who wanted to care for a lifetime. And I think began to plant that idea. And I was like, dang, like I love this woman and care deeply about her well-being and her heart and her future. And I think too, selfishly, it was like, I'm tired of being lonely. I think it was the season I was going through. It was just like, I was finally accepting the fact that someone cared deeply about me, and it was not just a passing thing. It wasn't someone who's just asking questions for the sake of asking questions. And I think in my own experience, I never felt that kind of love before. And even in my family situation, I think it was such a very new and freeing and liberating thing. And so I think to be in that place, it was January of 2019. And it was after I'd gone through, like we talked about earlier, going through counseling. I think it really helped to unlock that. I think a lot of my experience in the past, and again, someone who I think had led me on that path of like, let's talk more about this and explore more of this. And so that was my timeline. Or God's timing, but I think me being aware of it and being like, this is real, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. I think it's easy in divorce to feel like you're the product of what happened with your parents, but you learn so much of those behaviors, good and bad. And that's something we're kind of working through in premarital, is like, there's really good things you want to emulate from your parents, and there's really hard things. And I think not till you're in that like serious relationship where it's like, we're a team. There's no backup plan for us. I think it changes things, but also I think for us, like having that almost like stunted feeling because our parents divorced and different stories, but feeling like I'm afraid of that. And it's scary to think of putting not only us in that position, but children and, you know, that trauma. It's like it's been carried with us, and we're adults, and there's still certain things that we're still working through. And I think for me, there were times when I struggled with insecurity, even in us dating, of my past relationships and having a sexual past. And that I felt like, well, I don't know if I should tell him that, because what if he doesn't want to be with me? Like, I've got all this stuff and my, you know, that I've been saved, but I was still carrying that as like, it was something that I was like sinning with now. And I think that really, it was very liberating, like sharing that and feeling like that right person will like love you for all of that. But also too, like, it's important to be honest about the things that you have been through that you feel like you just need to share, because not having that be something that years later to be able to say, you know, hey, like, do you know this? I think just being open. And for me, I knew pretty early on into us dating, just because and we both had said it early on, that it just felt so easy. Like, there were obviously hard moments, but once we started dating, it felt like we had been dating for a lot longer, because it was just like easy. We'd hang out, we'd laugh, and a lot of our friends were already kind of knit together. So that was a huge thing. And I think, again, just having the shared values and love for the Lord, but also the people that have like built us up in our faith was huge. To me, that just felt like I knew pretty quickly. And I think going on certain mission trips, problem solving and doing things together, and that to me, it was cool to see, even before we were dating, just how each other kind of acts in a different place and with other people. Being uncomfortable and feeling unsure was neat. And there were a couple mission trips too where I felt like, oh man, like, I hope to do these with my future husband. And I was like, but I don't know if that's him. Like, we'll see. We'll see. But I think it's cool to have the foundation of our faith, but also being friends. Prior, it wasn't like, oh, I thought you were really cute, let's go get coffee. Like, there was this relationship of just being able to be friends and serving together in that capacity, which I think was really, really important and strong.
I think in the same way of just being, again, I think serving together too led to a place of like, we enjoyed doing these things together, and these are things we'd want to do beyond dating into marriage. And these are things that I think the Lord has blessed us both with, and something that we're both called to and both enjoy doing, and like living life together and loving the things that we get to do together, and serving and seeing people in all parts of the world and here at home at Calvary, but being able to see these lives played out in ways where we get to see answered prayer and get to see God move. And sometimes it's for the course of a week in Dominican or a long weekend in Mexico. And sometimes it's just every Sunday here at Calvary and Special Abilities and high school ministry and YA, and getting to connect with people. And I think that's the one thing too, that's been such a common denominator, if you will, and not to make any less of it, but it's like common denominator is people. And that's been the thing, I think, and that's such a byproduct and such an example of the thing that matters the most to us is people, more than anything else. So,
yeah, I agree. I think too, like, even before we'd even talked about like marriage, but thinking about what type of home and like environment you want to have. And when you find someone that wants those similarities without being distracted when you're dating and saying like, how many kids do you want? Or just like things that are out of order that you shouldn't. I mean, it's important to have those conversations, but I think as it's warranted. But I think early on we had talked about too, like the things that we wanted in a home and having where you had said not to have your boxes checked, but there were a lot of those things that were very just like, absolutely. We were on the same page of wanting to have a home that's welcoming to our friends and our family, and just kind of an open door policy of knowing that the things that we've been blessed with like aren't ours, and how do we serve other people in that way. And that's outside of church. And I think that to me was like a really strong moment where I felt like that's exactly what I want. I don't want to have a person, I don't want to be married to a person that's resenting that. I mean, of course, having, one-on-one time, of course, we, making sure that that's happening, but not being resentful of having people over consistently and being able to pour into other people. And that to me was a huge important, I think, piece that I felt God's put on my heart for a long time to foster or potentially adopt, and having someone that is on board with that, whatever that may look like. We don't know, again, just because that's something we feel we want, being prayerful, but having someone that's in that team environment of feeling like, if that's important to you, then that's important to me, and vice versa. And I think talking through that and not being afraid to share those things because you feel like that person's going to walk away, but saying like, this is what I feel God's put on my heart. And like, are you on board with that? Or what do you think of that? And being able to pray through that is important for sure.
Yeah. I think home being another theme. It's like the people you're with, you're at home when you're with the people you love and God's put in your life. And I think that's why we want to create a home like that, but also because Calvary's been home for us and home for many people, where it's like, you're home, you're here, and you're a part of this community that God's put you in. And I think that's something we want to replicate on our own scale, within the walls of our own home, but to be an open door for people who feel that desire, need, or just want a refuge, just much like it is here. It's like, if you're here and you're watching this, you're home. It's pretty amazing. So
I think so often in dating, you want to have like everything together, and you're like, oh, these are the things I want. And do you want that too? But being able to, the things that God's put on your heart of desires, to be able to share that with someone and not feel like it's too scary, or, even females in ministry of having opportunities to be in a pastoral role or whatever that may be. If that's something you're called to do, being able to share that with someone and explain that. I think going back to what I had said before too, to not be afraid to pursue that person. And even too with affirmation, what guy or girl, but not knowing where it's going to go, that's okay. But don't be afraid to affirm that person. And maybe that's it. You just stay friends and you don't end up moving forward. I think within the young adults area too, I know there's a lot of people that have started dating and maybe it didn't work out, or like someone there, but just don't know how to start that conversation. I think my advice would be, in a respectful way, to ask someone out. I don't think that's, I think in a respectful way, it doesn't need to be this like roundabout, like, let's hang out with all these friends together, but being able to say like, I'd love to know more about you. Let's get coffee, or go for a hike, things like that, to get to know someone. And I think in our story too, to affirm someone not needing something in return, just affirm them. And I think that's something I've really learned in this, but also when I talk with my high school girls. I want to lift them up and I want to encourage them. And I've only shared parts of our story with them because I want to share the parts that I feel like are constructive for them. And until they're in the season of engagement, I just don't know how some of that isn't as applicable, but being able to affirm someone, I think it's never taken in a negative way, and knowing that it's okay to not get the answer that you wanted, but affirm that person. Yeah.
I think to have confidence in the relationship of the person you're dating, without it's just like dance of like, you want the encouragement and prayer of people in your life around you. Obviously you want that community and that sense of peace, I think, that they bring, and just like, the things that they see, for example, my friends, the characteristics that they affirmed in Paolina and just in a very healthy group of friends that she has too. And that was really, really important for me. And that's advice I tell students all the time too. I said, this person that you're interested in, how healthy is their friend group? Because their friends will determine so much of who they become. And I've used the phrase before, but it's like, you're show me your friends and I'll show you your future. In the same way, if it's in the dating relationship, especially, it's like, you want to know that person has people in their life that they can turn to, because we can't be reliant on each other in every situation. We're reliant on the Lord in everything, but then also say, there's people that each of us can go to and go, I need counsel with this. And maybe it's a struggle that's something between us, but we need to kind of talk about and work through. Having people that each of us can kind of have as support. And we each have that, which is so important because it makes our relationship that much healthier too. But kind of going back to the beginning, not having expectations in terms of a certain timeline or a certain date or there's so many pressures, I think. And again, even now it's been the most common question I get asked, besides, what do you do at Calvary? Is how's wedding planning? And then it'll be, how was the wedding? And then it'll be, how's the honeymoon? And when are the kids coming? And then when's the next kid? There's just this natural progression of the world that we live in. It's not a bad thing. It means people care, which is really, it's a beautiful thing. But to also just enjoy the time together and enjoy that time being together and not feeling you have to keep doing all these things and not trying to, it's not for anyone else, but for the two of you and in that relationship. So,
yeah, I think it's important to in dating, to ask questions that are challenging. And I think with everything in a respectful way, to be able to ask, how do you feel about marriage just in general, not putting that pressure of just because we're dating means that we're going to get married. I think as it progresses in that way, it's healthy to have those conversations. But to your point of not putting all that pressure of, okay, we've been dating for 3 months. Well, like we probably should have already talked about marriage. I think that expectation and that always looking to the next thing is detrimental because you're missing the things that I think God's doing in your relationship, and your relationship is your relationship and it should be that way. And I think in getting wisdom from friends, it's helpful and advice, but I think to be mindful of the things that you share with people in hopes of, if it's affirmation, that's one thing. But if you're feeling like you're just trying to stay with where your friends are, I think you're never going to enjoy what God's doing in your relationship and what you're learning too, because we all have different upbringings. And I think, again, for me, I didn't think I wanted to get married at a certain point because I was afraid of, my parents, their outcome and all of that. But I didn't want it to be something that I felt like, okay, if I do this, I'm just going to be resenting or like not enjoying the marriage because I'm going to be so focused on like any negative thing that happens and think, oh, that means we're doomed. But I think for us too, and something in premarital and going back on the dating thing is just communication. If something's important to you, talk about it and bring it up. Don't let it fester. Be able to share it with that person. And again, I think if it's important to you, it should be important to that person and vice versa, listening and being able to learn, being a student of one another.
Indeed.
That's what we're learning right now.
Indubitably.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of components in there, but I think to find someone that you can be a team with, to encourage them, I think someone to do life with and to serve with. I think not only just the covenant of marriage, but to start a family and to teach them to do those things, to serve and love people well. But I think at the core of it, I think of the covenant and what it is within marriage.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot of different things.
Yeah. One of the phrases I think I've gleaned the most from as we've gone through this premarital counseling has been keeping short accounts. And so all the things that Paolina said, a covenant and this thing we get to create and build together with the Lord's help and direction and wisdom, I think is being able to not always agree on everything, but then also be like, but I love you. And so I think that's like crucial and in the communication part too. And I think in how we just realizing that people watch. I think people are observant in our world, just in as much as they see, the conversations we have at church or with one another when we're having coffee or whatever it might be. I think the consistency too in that relationship. So it's the covenant of marriage and coming together as one, but also the life lived beyond the day of the wedding. And that's another really cool phrase that we've both been hearing, and it's preparing for the wedding, but planning for the marriage. And it's such a different context because it's very easy to be focused on like, what was the first date? What was the first, all these like these things that are important in the story, but not the entire book. And I think that's really what's so cool is to be able to see these moments. And even the wedding day, can't wait. It's going to be amazing, but it's the marriage beyond. And I think it's the people, much like baptism, it's the cloud of witnesses of people that we get to share in that story with. And so I think that's all part of marriage. I think singleness has prepared me in as much as it's given me the opportunities to encourage other people and to see other people live out, and sometimes, quite frankly, crash and burn, I think, in relationships. So you get to see the whole spectrum. But I think that in that season of observation, there's times, and again, I think it goes back to being content, but still feeling a desire to be not just in a relationship for a season, but for a lifetime. And I think seeing, again, people who've gone through it and maybe started too soon or whatever, just in kind of the same results of our parents' stories. I think it's prepared me to observe and see someone who's solid, and see Paolina for the heart and the character and the depth to really understand and have this moment of like, oh, now I understand why. I think there's a lot of times I think we both would attest to just being in that season of like, why not now? Why? Because you hear it from people around you, hear it from your own family, like, when, like, gosh, there's got to be somebody at that church. There's thousands of people there. And, all of that, you're always calculating, you're always thinking, but then realizing it's like, okay, like in the season, I'm still able to serve. And then Brian Howard said it really, really well several times over the years. And he said, you've been able to do things in ministry being single that I can't do being married and now having children. So it's been a season where God's personally used me in my singleness to I think be available, or to be planting seeds, or to be serving on mission, or to be a part of high school ministry and all these different things. But I think now the transition being that it's been a great season, but I can't wait for the next. And so that's something very, very important to remember too. But it's I think, again, community. So even when you're single, it's like you have a community. You're not alone. And I think a reminder of God's desire for us to still be with people, even if we're not married. It's like there's still people around you. Look around you in this room right now. There's people all around who are like you, believe it or not, who maybe have a different background, different walk of life, different story. But the fact is God's created each of you in his image. And I think to be in a place where it's like, even if you're single, it's like God's preparing you for the next, always on to the next thing. It's not always in our timing, and that's okay. I think to be at peace with that and go, it's been an amazing season of being single, but it's also something I can't wait to be married and have a family and live a life and be able to share in those moments together that are things maybe I've experienced or she's experienced. We get to share in together now. And how cool is that? So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think too, there's moments that you think in singleness, like, when is it going to end? Or when are you going to meet that next person that you're going to go on a date with? And I think just being able to feel an encouragement of knowing that God doesn't waste anything, any of those seasons that you're in. And for you waiting for that guy or waiting for that girl, of like, God's conditioning you and training you to be that great wife or husband, and just like that partner that you haven't even met yet. Just like, I think that helped me a lot in those moments of maybe it's someone I've already met or it's someone that I haven't met yet, but knowing like the way that I'm growing in my faith, I'm hoping that that's happening for that other person. And that confidence and comfort, I think, was helpful for me in times where I felt defeated or frustrated, whether it was like going to a family function or going to a holiday where everyone's asking and I felt like I was always the only one, which I know I wasn't, but it just feels that way sometimes. Or that year going by where you've done all the holidays and you're like, okay, what's hopefully this time next year, but just being able to trust that God doesn't waste any of those moments, hard and, good as well, that the people that you're with now too, to be able to learn more of the things that bring you joy and bring you value, like JD said too, of you might not have that amount of free time or independence in the future, and knowing it's just going to look a little bit different, still great, but to be able to like see the positives in the season that you're in and the things that you can do, because when you are in a relationship with someone too, your priorities are shifted. You still want to do those different things, but when it's in God's timing too, those things fit. And it's not like, oh my gosh, I have too many things happening. Like, you will know because it's something that God's blessed and it's not something you're forcing into your life. But I think singleness too, to know that you are growing into the person that you're meant to be for your future husband or your future wife, I think it helps encourage you and make you feel confident in that way. So.
Well said.
Thanks.
I think God revealed to me it's okay to be alone and still be seeking and to be confident in who he is. And this past year specifically, when I think of obviously 2020, but just in general, Philippians 4:10 through 13 speaks to, it finishes with, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But prior to that, it's like I've learned to be content, whether hungry or well fed, to be with plenty or with nothing. And all these things, I think, kind of centers around the idea that no matter what, like, God is still good. He's still faithful. And so I think that, or believe rather, the idea that wherever I'm at, like, God still is for me. He still cares about me deeply and cares about us now that we're together as well. But the idea that no matter what, he's still faithful. And I think so being in that season, I would look back and see that God is who he says he is. His promises are still true. And it doesn't change who he is. And it doesn't mean he loves us any less or any more. It just means that we're in that season, and that's okay. And not to be, I think, anxious about that or worried about that, or I think the hypotheticals of what if this and what if that, and all these things that we can kind of go down that proverbial trail of uncertainty. And I think when we do that, we kind of tend to leave God behind. And it's very easy to be on that path and be like, I'm not content because I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that. And we've talked about it, and I've told Brian over the years, I said, especially for high school students or young adults, I said, the idea is that you graduate high school, go to college, start a career, get married, have 2.3 kids, work for 45 years, get a gold watch, golf, and die. And God has so much more for us in that. And whether we're alone in that season, dating in that season, married for a majority of that season, God's still faithful. And he's still good. And so it doesn't change that. So I think instead of looking at our own insecurities, we have to look at God's truth and really understand that he's still who he says he is. And that whether our relationship status changes or not, is not predicated on, it does not dictate who God is. And so I think that's really what I've learned. So
that's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think for me, a few different things, but specifically the power in like relinquishing control and feeling like my faith was strong, but I was holding on to a few areas of my life that I felt like I don't know what God's doing here, but I kind of want to have a handle on it. And that was finances and relationship. It just felt like I was giving all these other things to him, but it felt like I just couldn't let go of that. And I think when I was able to do so, I started seeing just the power in other relationships, whether it's just friendships, but being able to not have an agenda in that way of just letting things play out the way they should. I think the power of vulnerability too, of being able to share things that really feel uncomfortable with people. For me, that was specifically my parents' divorce. There were a lot of things that I held on to because I felt I didn't want to be a downer. I didn't want to share all those deep moments. I wanted to share the really positive things God's done in my life. I didn't want to share the things that he was doing in my life that ended up being answered prayers. Like I think I felt I had this like outer, this is what I share with people, and I only go so far. And I think being able to share, even in singleness, the things that I was learning, that I almost wanted to seem like I was always enjoying it, but I wasn't. There were a lot of moments where I felt like, but it would be so much fun to do this with a partner. And I think it's just made even this time so much sweeter because it's been something that I feel like I've worked through a lot of those things. but knowing, like I'd said before, he doesn't waste any of it. And if you can write down all the things that you had felt really defeated by, but then God provided, and it was a totally different way than what you expected, all of those moments have been better than I had expected. So I think that reflection was helpful in that time. I think, again, in singleness, to have that focus of you're the one person. And so you're having to do a lot of that deep work instead of, I think doing that in a relationship is wonderful, but there's something so sweet about when you aren't as distracted in that way to just be able to do that work with God and figure out what are the things I need to figure out now. So still learning though.
Mm-hmm. Always learning.
Always learning.
I was thinking about that kind of paired or dovetail with the last question. I think that is to share your story. Mm-hmm. I think so oftentimes we underestimate the power of it, but yet time and time again, I mean, in addition to scripture, when it says, be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have in Christ Jesus. And don't let people look down upon you because of your youth. Mm-hmm. And I think of that specifically in the idea that your story matters. And I've heard this phrase before. And again, Brian shared it before. I won't say which one. I'm just kidding. Brian Howard. But it shared the idea. It's like every number. I'm trying to think. Sorry. Every number has a story. Every story has. Wait a minute. I have to recount it. Dang.
While you're thinking, I'll share mine.
Please.
Or you can Google it. Just kidding.
What's Google?
Yeah, right. I think just the power of community. That's something that, I mean, I came to young adults in 2016, fall of 2016, and it took me a little bit to join a small group, but I think that I started seeing just the people that God provided in that season, and some that are still at young adults, some that have moved out of the area. But like you had said, sharing your story, but being in community is, I think, what changed everything, because it held me accountable in the things that I wanted to achieve, but also the questions that I had about my faith. And I think that regular attendance, whether it's young adults or just your small group, is what helped me just have that sounding board of people that were praying, but growing. I wanted to grow in my faith, but I don't think I realized until I was in that small group that was the priority and what really helped me. And some of those people, again, are still young adults and are still in my life. Some that have moved away and are married and have kids now. But looking back, that was the consistent part of my walk. And in a long season of singleness was that community. And I tried to go to YA once a week. That was my goal, but small group was always that consistent. And I think that that's just so important. And I think even too, to not feel discouraged if it takes you a little bit of time to find that right small group, of finding people that you feel you can be vulnerable. And like we were saying too, sharing those hard things and not feeling like, well, I just want to share this and everything's great, but investing in that community is really what's shaped me now in leading a high school small group, in implementing that and being able to share that with the girls, to say community is powerful and you need that. And especially for them going into college and all of that, but it's important. And it's that consistent piece, I think, in your faith journey, that it might look different in different seasons, but it's important to have that.
Yeah. And the quote was, every I do. Every number has a name, every name has a story, and every story matters to God. And I think your story, whatever that is, matters. And not to be a thing of, it's not a self-effacing thing. It's something to be shared in. And the way you share in community, like Paolina shared, is being vulnerable and being consistent. And so I think the challenge too is to show up. So much of life is just showing up. And I tell our high school small group, it's like, I don't care what kind of car you show up in here. I don't care if you show up in a broken down bicycle or a Lamborghini, as long as you show up. The fact is you're here, and that's what matters. So all the other things are kind of extemporaneous as far as like how you got there. It's the fact that you showed up. And I think so oftentimes we want to commit to 10 or 15 different things, commit to one or two of those things in community consistently, and see God move. It's almost like having one garden, being consistent and tilling it and planting it and watering it and tending to it. And I think not allowing yourself to get caught up in the busyness of this world, but the business of what God has for you. And I think in doing so, you're able to allow people to invest in you, like Paolina said, too, being vulnerable in those small group scenarios or a community where you're actually able to live life with and see like the fruit that comes from that. I've known many a student and a former high school pastor from here, Pastor Drew Sams, who said, when he was in college, he said I would go to one church for the college group. I'd go to another church for the Sunday morning preaching at a different church, and I'd go to another church for the worship. He's like, I never got invested anywhere, nor was I invested in. And so how could I possibly be rooted and grow and actually understand what it meant to put roots down where God had me? And so I just encourage you just to show up on the nights where you're like, I just don't feel it. I'm just kind of burned out. Show up. Yeah. There's so many other things that we do that have little, if any, eternal value. And I think community is one of those things we get to experience, even just to sit. And if you're having a rough day, just sit there and have people pray over you, to encourage you, to worship over you, to hear the message. And how many times have you gone to a service and been like, whoa, I needed to hear that. That's why. And so just to be consistent, I think is something I would encourage you guys in, because that's where you're able to see the longevity and the faithfulness of God move too. And I know part of my story, and Paolina's heard this, but an example is when my parents were divorced, my mom came to a singles group here at Calvary. And I remember being a kid hanging out with other kids of parents who were now single, and being here and running around the halls of Calvary and being in a place where I didn't know what was happening, but it was a great place to be. And as time went on, I think seeing the fruit that even came from that and developing confidence and knowing people here and wanting to serve here at a later place in my life. But then it was really sweet. It was about a year and a half after my mom passed. I was in a group here at Calvary called Grief Share, and walking upstairs, going to that class on a Monday night. And I remember I walked past this group. It was like a singles group, and there were kids outside. And I was like, that was me 25 years ago. And here I am going to celebrate the life of a loved one who was once in that singles group, and just seeing the circle, if you will, of life, but in a way where it's like has this eternal value that's so cool that we only get to see by being consistent and showing up. And so that was really powerful for me too. But
I think too, like whether it's small group or church, like you were touching on times when you might feel, tired, or just your plate is so full that day from things that you had going on, and you're just wiped, that you might not need it, but someone else might need you to pray for them, or you might meet someone for the first time. And that's something that it was said a long time ago at young adults, and that stuck with me, of times where I felt, okay, I don't really need to go tonight, and going and having a really cool conversation with someone. And I think on the small group side, whether it's you go into a small group and you're not doing stuff outside a small group, that I would encourage that, getting together with people outside of group, or going to main church together, if you're not going to young adults that week, like doing different things together, that it's not just small group is where your community is, doing life together, I think is the component that then brings your relationship that much stronger and brings a lot of value of it too, because you might find that you have way more in common outside of the group, and being able to have that shared experience and growth in that way is important.
It's huge. Yeah. Another quote I heard a long time ago from my college pastor here at Calvary was, we spend so much time doing as a Christian, we spend less time being a Christian. We can get really busy even as Christians to kind of do the things everyone else is doing, and keeping act to the point that it's not even not enjoyable. It's just we don't even realize what God's doing because we're so busy doing these things that we're not actually being as a Christian's called to be. And just being consistent in small group and community is crucial. So the other phrase too is not being a Lone Ranger Christian. I think that idea like, I can just do Bible study at home by myself, and you can for a bit, but after a while it gets to be pretty lonely. And I think the idea that you're here is the heart God has for each of us to be in community together. So, and you're not just attending you're not just attending service, rather you're growing. And so see it as an opportunity to grow.
Well done.
Nailed it.
Don't say that.